And welcome to this beautiful Friday morning. Thank you for joining us and signing up. It's always good to see new faces, someone new to network with and to build relationships because they are so important. The Adventist Community Services, the Maryland Out of School Time Network, which we shall use the acronym MOST from now on, the City of Takoma Park, Nonprofit Montgomery, AmeriCorps, Vista are the organizations that have worked hard to bring this event to you. I'm Ken Flemmer. I'm the Executive Director of Adventist Community Services of Greater Washington, right on the edge of Takoma Park, Silver Spring. We're a community social service organization. We impact about 7,000 people every year. We have a pantry, we have a clothes closet, we have a learning center, and for the last several years we've been running out of school programs, summer day camps that have been quite impactful. And this summer, if everything moves the way it's moving, we will be having 300 kids enrolled out in East Montgomery County. Elementary school kids, and in the last 5 years through the camps, we've impacted about 1,000 kids with academics, swimming lessons, fine arts provided by Strathmore, and Montgomery County Rec that provides a lot of the games, the free breakfast, and the free lunch. So it's been quite a partnership, and we're excited about it. Special thanks to AmeriCorps Vista, Jack Morton particularly, who's sitting right there in his blue shirt, who has been working for months to make this happen. Terry Siemens from the Takoma Park City Council, who arranged for this room and got the city employees up early to get everything set up here for us. Jennifer McKinsey from MOST. Outside, okay. Blessed Coffee provided the coffee for us, and the panelists, which will be introduced a bit later. A discussion today on collaboration to build stronger, vibrant communities. Today, communities are challenged. Montgomery County has its challenges. There's the income gap that we talk about. There's the education gap we talk about. There's longevity gaps that get mentioned from time to time. There's the food gap that many of us are involved in. There's the SNAP gap. Well, that even rhymes. You know, it's one of those shocking numbers. 64% of Montgomery County residents that are eligible for SNAP are not enrolled. You know, that's a major asset that's being missed for the citizens of Montgomery County. And just a week or so ago, some citizen here in Takoma Park posted some analysis that is quite, to again show you how communities are in distress. 21% of Takoma Park homeowners pay more than 30% of their income for housing. And that median income is $141,000. 41% of the renters pay more than 30% of their income for their housing, and their median income is only $51,000. So there's a lot of gaps, there's a lot of challenges that range across the whole spectrum from food to housing to the achievement of their children. Adventist Community Services feels so fortunate to have so many partners working together to impact the families in our community and in the neighborhood, with many of you actually in this room. AmeriCorps is one of those new partners for us. This is the first year that we have worked with AmeriCorps Vista, collaborating with us on some key challenges of youth, families, and working for inclusive, vibrant communities. So I want to welcome Andrew Newman from the Vista. He's the Vista Director for MOST, to provide an overview of the MOST program and maybe share with you how you can get involved with MOST and Vista.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? Very good. So I thought I'd be like walking around the stage, TED Talk style, but that's okay. Ken, thank you for the introduction and for the poignant remarks on sort of the need for community collaboration. I think it's a wonderful topic. I think Vista as a concept fits very neatly into this, so it's wonderful to be able to sort of segue into that. can't quite see. I wonder if I can do something like this. Okay, so I might just talk without a microphone. AmeriCorps Vista, what is it? Like, move it around? Should I just wheel it around? So it is an acronym as well. It stands for Volunteers in Service to America. And its entire goal is to combat poverty. It was created in part with the War on Poverty in 1964. And it is a volunteer initiative where people are placed in communities and with organizations that work with folks that live in poverty. And it is the main goal is to build capacity.
Excuse me, Ted.
It's not on, but thank you. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Wonderful, wonderful. So yes, so building capacity is the overall goal of AmeriCorps Vista that essentially allows organizations to serve more individuals and to serve them better as well. So the overall mission, we sort of went over that, is to alleviate poverty by engaging volunteers to build capacity at these organizations, which can be both a nonprofit as well as public entities as well, so city governments, schools, as well as nonprofits such as Adventist. 4 purposes: anti-poverty, building capacity, empowering community, engaging community, as well as ensuring that these solutions are sustainable, these initiatives, these things that are built onto programs through a Vista last beyond the 1 to 3 years that a Vista program operates. So a bit about the Vista sort of year. 365 days, they work full time. Vista members are compensated with a living allowance. And also, we can move on. So, there's about 8,000 serving members currently in the United States. That's each year. We have about 25 members in our cohort, and we operate statewide, based at youth development organizations, out-of-school time organizations as well. Money is raised, volunteers are mobilized, programs are created. Those are some of the big things, systems and processes to better operate as an organization or as a program provider. A bit about MOST. I'm not sure if Elise is going to have time on the panel to talk about our entity, but we've been around for about 10 years. Our entire goal is to support more and better after-school programs, so the Vista component fit very nicely with our mission. We do advocacy work. We advocate for more funding in Annapolis as well as Capitol Hill. And we support quality through providing tools, best practices, as well as trainings for out-of-school time organizations as well as direct service providers. And then also we directly are involved with organizations building capacity through our Vista work. So our Vista program has been around for about 7 years. It is statewide. We started in Baltimore, but we are now in 7 counties 6 counties currently. Our main focuses in the past have been STEM-based programming, as well as hunger initiatives, combating hunger, and supporting innovative projects, which is a lot of time would mean like a pilot initiative, an entire new, say, a middle school coding program. Here's some lovely pictures of our cohorts. So full cohort for the full year is on the right. This is actually our summer associates program, which is a short-term version of the Vista program, which is about 6 to 8 weeks and is wonderful. And that one's a little bit different because you can actually provide direct service. You could be, you could facilitate classes, whereas full-term Vistas, the real kind of official Vista program, is indirect service, which means it has to be behind the scenes. So as I said earlier, 40 hours a week they do serve full-time for 1 full year, working with colleges, nonprofits, faith-based organizations, government, local government, as well as potentially state government. Let's move on. Things that they can do: recruiting volunteers, training direct service providers with sort of potentially a new curriculum, organizing coalitions, doing outreach, fundraising, as well as in-kind resource development. They can help with recruitment for staff members. They can help with recruitment for other Vistas. They can help further sort of push along the Vista project that maybe was designed before they came here, but then they can help to ensure that it keeps going the next year as well. So that's sort of creating the infrastructure as well to do so, and a lot of partnership cultivation. Here's just a nice picture. We also do service projects. We meet once a month, and we have a professional development session for the Vistas based on sort of their needs and the skills that they would like to develop during their year, because it is a short sort of turnaround from when they start. And then we also do a volunteer project. So this is actually, today is one of our monthly meetings, and after this we'll have lunch, and then we'll go do a beautification project in Takoma Park. Okay, so a lot of the Vistas here don't actually know these totals yet, so we're very excited, and we want to give them a big hand for everything they've been able to do. This number is already out of date, but as of September, this cohort has raised over $1 million in cash for these programs. That's through grants. They've been doing great with grants, donation, solicitation, as well as special event planning, that sort of thing, but pretty much the majority of grants. These grants are from private foundations, corporate foundations, state and local government, as well as federal government. So if anyone has questions about grants, they can ask Lynn, she's the expert, as well as all of our Vistas, because they've been doing great work. In addition to that, about $200,000 of in-kind resources has been raised. So this could be stuff like space, food, materials, all sorts of things that you need to run a program that normally costs money as well. And several pilot program initiatives have been launched this year, last year, every single year we launch a couple. We do like those projects. They're pretty exciting. One of our Vistas in the room, Kendall, is working on the middle school implementation of a high school coding program. So it is an after school and an in-school program, I do believe, that teaches young people to code and gets them ready for the 21st century workplace. And now they have a middle school version of that, started a little earlier. Other things, Maryland Mentor is a statewide entity that does essentially the same kind of work we do supporting the field for mentoring programs. That was started, actually, we had a Vista for that before we had an executive director for that, and she helped set everything up to sort of create an entire organization, which now operates semi-independently from us. In addition to that, we have, our cohort has collectively recruited and managed over 1,000 volunteers who have served a total of 6,000 hours this year alone. And the direct impact on our program participants is about 3,299 students served this year. So generally we serve about anywhere from 2,000 to 5,000 students that are directly impacted through our pretty small footprint. We are growing. We plan to have 35 projects this year, 35 members as well, 1 member per project. And we're increasing our impact, our geographical range, as well as our range of programs. So this is Community Bridges in Silver Spring. This was a project we had up in Baltimore, working with this organization called the Sixth Branch that does sort of community gardening initiatives throughout the city, particularly Oliver neighborhood, I believe. This is Leveling the Playing Field, that do sports equipment redistribution. We have a Vista there at the Silver Spring location. We've had one in the Baltimore location too. And then this is at a large homeless center called I think the St. Francis Center. Some benefits of serving as a Vista member: there is a living allowance, as I said. It's actually calculated in the area you're living in. So what's the cost of living for DC, matched at 105% of the national poverty line. So it differs in different parts of the state. It's actually, you get your highest living allowance here because it costs the most to rent a place around here. Payroll services, that's out of date. We do payroll ourselves now. We are given a program grant to pretty much operate everything involved with the Vista initiative ourselves. There's a relocation allowance. So if someone moves from outside of the state or about 50 miles away from their location, they are given it's a mileage rate, and there's also a settle-in allowance, so they will receive $750 in the coming year when they start, to help with deposits and things things like that. End of service benefit is important, almost a $6,000, essentially it's a Pell Grant that can be used for any accredited institution. It's a federal grant. And that goes up a little bit every year as well. And if you don't want that, if you're done with school, then there is a cash end of service award as well. One thing that's really cool about Vista that other AmeriCorps programs don't have is the NCE status, non-competitive eligibility for federal government positions, which would bump any alumni member up in the application process to above folks that don't have that status. As I mentioned, with our great numbers, that the majority, pretty much all of our outputs and our outcomes are achieved through our partnerships, through our collaboration with these entities. And for that, thank all the members here, as well as the organizations that have steered them to success. Jennifer in the background, our Vista leader who also supports the Vista members day to day. I salute you all. So, yep, most has been doing this. We coordinate the program, we set the projects up. If any entity is interested in having a Vista member hosted at their site, they can speak with me, my information. I have cards out there, as well as there's information on my website, and we'll send you some emails as well. Let's see what else is on here. Here's some of our wonderful sites, supervisors, and Vista members with them. This was for our Day of the A, which is sort of an annual celebration of AmeriCorps members. We asked everyone to take pictures with their supervisor. As you can see, all these supervisors are very happy with their Vistas. We find it's a great relationship. And these are some of our programs currently that we're partnering with. It's not all of them. I couldn't fit them all on the page, and I will not be able to do that next year either. I think that's a testament to our success. So that is actually it. Here's my contact information. If anyone would like a copy of this, I'm sure we could email that out to you as well. But if you'd like just some follow-up information, feel free to send me an email. And my state director is on here as well. So she's the CNCS, or the federal, who oversees essentially the Maryland programs. And she can help you set up a program if you don't quite fit into the out-of-school time youth development focus that we do prioritize. Thank you.
Would all of the Vista volunteers at least wave to us so we can see the most volunteers? Thanks for your service. We've been very happy with Jack working with us and has made a big difference in our planning for future summer programs. Lesli McDonald is the fearless leader of Nonprofit Montgomery, an association. I'll let her say a few words about Nonprofit Montgomery, and she will introduce the panelists that are here.
That sounded like a qualifier, those that are here.
We're missing one, at least it seems that way.
Well, it's Bike to Work Day. Maybe he biked to work, right? Good morning, everyone. I'm Lesli McDonald, Executive Director of Nonprofit Montgomery. How many of you have heard of Nonprofit Montgomery? Raise your hands. Oh, yay, lots of you. Okay, so I don't need to go on for a long time. But for those of you who don't know Nonprofit Montgomery, we're an alliance of nonprofits here in Montgomery County. And our main functions are to provide capacity building and support to nonprofits, to develop nonprofit leaders through training and convening. And we do a big piece of our work is advocacy, not only for funding for nonprofits, but also for policies that don't disadvantage nonprofits. So we work closely with Montgomery County government. And I have to say, this is a wonderful day to be a nonprofit in Montgomery County. Yesterday, the council approved $14.5 million in community grants for nonprofits, and also approved contract increases for nonprofits in the Department of Health and Human Services. So those of you who work here, you may know that the county relies heavily on nonprofits to deliver services, and many nonprofits contract directly with the county. Well, sometimes those contracts are 3 to 5 year contracts with no increases. And so the council yesterday supported our advocacy request, which was please provide increases to those contracts so that nonprofits can provide great services, but also keep up with increased costs. So yay for Montgomery County. So the theme of our panel today is creating dynamic communities, how government and nonprofits intersect in an uncertain fiscal environment. And I also just wanted to mention before we get started with the panel that Nonprofit Montgomery, in collaboration with WorkSource Montgomery, the Primary Care Coalition, the Food Council of Montgomery County, we actually put out what we call sort of like a manifesto. And I left some copies on the front table. It's a vision for nonprofit and government collaboration, basically pointing out that nonprofits and government need each other to provide essential services. And it kind of sets out some rules for how we can work together and support one another, and how government can appreciate nonprofit strength and ask us for input and mostly give us a seat at the table when decisions are made that affect nonprofits and the people that are served. So I encourage you to take a copy with you when you leave. If we could have our panel come on up. Those of you who are here. Morning. All right. I'd like to present the panel for this morning. We have at the far end here, Ms. Adrian Clutter, Division Chief of the Montgomery County Department of Recreation. Towards the center, Peter Francho, our Controller of Maryland, was suffering very badly from allergies, which I can appreciate. You can hear that in my voice. I'm suffering as well. But the good news is in his place we have Senator Craig Zucker, who represents District 14. He is also the Deputy Majority Leader for the Maryland Senate. So honored to have Senator Zucker here with us. Next we have the Honorable Talisha Ciarci, who represents the city of Takoma Park. And finally, Ms. Elise Preston, Associate Director of the Maryland Out of School Time Network. Welcome all. And so we're going to give you each a few minutes to introduce yourselves. The agenda said 8 minutes, but Ken and I talked about maybe we could make it 5. Just give a few brief remarks about yourself, your background, and some remarks about collaboration and how you see nonprofits and government working together. And I believe we have a timekeeper. Okay, so look to Jack. He's going to tell you when it's time to stop. Adrian, would you start?
All right.
He's got a sign.
I guess that's on, right? All right, I feel like I'm at council. Push the button to talk. Good morning. My name is Adrian Clutter. I'm a Division Chief with Montgomery County Recreation. I grew up here in Montgomery County. I am a graduate of Wheaton High School. Had a fantastic time at Wheaton, loved the school. And went on to college at Shepherd University, where I earned a degree in recreation. But I first got my experience in public service with the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, Department of Parks in Montgomery County. And that's where I really started to develop a passion. And I love to be active and outdoors. And my very first job was at Lake Needwood in Rockville. And I worked with the boats, lots of crazy stories that I could share with you from Lake Needwood. And then I went on to college, but what I didn't know at the time was what was the entry point into service. I didn't really know that you could go to school for recreation. And so when I went to college, I found out, wow, I could really do this as a career. I was so passionate about it. Then I had the thoughts and the doubts, but I'm supposed to be something like a lawyer or a doctor. And now I'm majoring in recreation. And what kind of stereotypes were going to happen to me. And I didn't realize at that time the impacts that you could have on people's lives by working in the field of parks and recreation. So glad I made that choice. It is, I'm definitely defined by my career in many ways. So I went on to graduate school, and I earned a second degree in recreation because I loved it so much. So I went to Frostburg State University. And back then, I went through a graduate school program where online was just starting to get popular, and you had to go to school every weekend, Saturdays and Sundays, and sit through the program. And it's kind of like that story that I tell now. It sounds like you walk 10 miles to school in the snow, uphill with bare feet. But it was a great program, and I met a lot of great colleagues there. As a matter of fact, I would end up being in a cohort with a good friend of mine, Nita Satina, who is the superintendent of the Maryland Park Service. And from our relationship from graduate school, we've been able to do really exciting collaborations around conservation with a Conservation Job Corps program in 2 counties, Montgomery and Prince George's County. So when I got out of Shepherd, I continued to work for the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission. I worked at Brookside Gardens. What a great place to work. If you haven't been there to see the butterfly festival and among the plants, but I did hide from people because I didn't know a lot about plants. So they would want to know about the banana tree, and I would be afraid to come out of the office. I learned a lot there. I went on to really get involved in the recreation side and community engagement in Prince George's County, where I started to specialize in youth development work, and really kind of made a mark on the county in youth development. That's where I got connected with a really cool organization called MOST. Got introduced to things like the Youth Program Quality Initiative, and really started to understand the large collective impacts that we could have working in this industry. I spent a lot of years working all around Prince George's County, and then had an opportunity to come work back home in Montgomery County. Always thought I'd come home again, enjoyed my time in Prince George's County, and about 5.5 years ago, I came back to Montgomery County as the Youth Development Manager, and now serving as the Division Chief. It's one of the most unique things about working here in Montgomery County is the collaboration, and it's so special. We certainly couldn't do what we do without our partners. Partners have helped from everything from financing to budgets, to program ideas and management, to staffing, to adding resources and amenities to programs. Right now, our county and our department's working on a major project in downtown Silver Spring to bring community resources to where we wouldn't be able to build if it wasn't for collaboration, partnership with the Department of Housing and private builders to put a community center in a high-rise development with an aquatics facility. So quite an amazing collaboration. But one that is so near and dear to my heart when I think about impacts and think about immediate impacts on the lives of youth and families. I think about the relationship that we have in the East County with Adventist. Just such amazing opportunity, and it looks like we will be the recipient of a $171,000 grant from the Maryland State Department of Education for 21st Century Learning to put expanded camp opportunities into East County. And we couldn't do it alone. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't be able to do it alone without the great partners. And then, I mean, it's funny how when the momentum starts building and you start to collaborate, that it even gets broader, because I could certainly speak to the job fairs that we've had in partnership with Senator Zucker's office, and we've received a number of great and fantastic staff out of those opportunities who will work for us and serve those families and youth this summer. So that's kind of a long roundabout story of how I got to where I'm at. But I can't speak highly enough. If I leave you with one lasting impression, if you've seen the TV show Parks and Recreation, I always think they were stalking me, that I tell everybody I was the original Leslie Knope, and that I share with her undying passion. And so that's a little bit about myself. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I love the enthusiasm, and I love Parks and also welcome the Honorable Evan Glass, Montgomery County Council member. We were wondering if you bike to work, since this is Bike to Work Day.
No, but I was busy doing other work. So
Of course you were.
I apologize for being late.
Well, and you missed it. I said really great things about the Montgomery County Council for your approval yesterday of contract increases to nonprofits. Yay, yay.
3% increases.
3% increase, awesome. Evan, we're just going and saying a few words about ourselves, introduction, how we got into the work that we're doing, and a little bit about collaboration. So if you would like to take it away.
Sure. Well, so while there was no television show modeled after me in Parks and Rec, there is a different similarity that I actually got my professional start in television. While not an NBC comedy, possibly a comedy of another sort, I used to be a journalist at CNN. And that's what brought me down to Washington, D.C. to study at American University. And I wanted to be a journalist, and I became a journalist. And for 12 years, I covered Congress, presidential campaigns, national politics, and I traveled the country, and it was an incredible job. And at the same time, I had moved to Montgomery County, moved to downtown Silver Spring. And as Silver Spring was growing and all these high-rises were popping up, I moved in down East-West Highway, and I'm walking to the metro station with thousands of my new neighbors, and the sidewalks were crumbling, and there were no crosswalks to get across the street to the metro. And I thought to myself, I know how Congress works, I know how the federal government works, but who do I talk to in my neighborhood about fixing sidewalks? And that is when it struck me to reach out and do some investigating and speaking to folks in Montgomery County to figure out how to improve my community. Formed a neighborhood association, got other neighbors who were engaged and wanted to make our neighborhood as good as it could be. And that began the two lives I began leading, in that I was on Capitol Hill covering Congress, running through the halls of the Capitol building during the daytime and rushing on the metro to come back to Silver Spring to attend community meetings about making my community safe, safe place to walk, safe place to live. And that is, after 12 years of being at CNN, I got tired of all the travel and started getting more involved in the community. And immediately after leaving CNN, I was approached to join the board of Equality Maryland, the state's largest LGBTQ organization at the time, as we were fighting for marriage equality. And for 12 years, I couldn't get politically involved because I covered politics. And my bosses didn't mind me advocating for sidewalks because it's not a Republican or Democratic issue, it's just a local issue. But now that I was freed from the chains of objective journalism, I was able to share my thoughts and tell the world, essentially, I was a gay man who supported marriage equality and threw myself into that type of politics. And 6 years later, this last November, was elected to serve in an at-large capacity on the Montgomery County Council, representing all 500 square miles and 1.1 million people. And yesterday, we approved first straw vote, test vote of the $5.8 billion budget here in Montgomery County. So long and short, that is how I came from TV to serving you on the county council.
Thank you. Senator Zucker.
Well, thank you very much, Leslie. Terry, thank you for inviting Comptroller Peter Francho to this. I am not Comptroller Peter Francho, although I sometimes play him on TV in town halls. But the truth is that although I'm a Maryland State Senator, it is a part-time job. And when I'm not in session, I do work in the Comptroller's office. And Comptroller Peter Francho and I go back close to 20 years. And I was telling Terry Siemens, Terry Siemens knows that I first got involved with Takoma Park back in 1999 when I worked at that time for Delegate Peter Francho, and moved on to work for Congressman Wynn after that, and then came back to help Delegate Peter Francho win the Comptroller race, and then became the Deputy Chief of Staff to the Comptroller. And when I ran for office myself in 2010 and won, I transitioned into a special assistant role. So it's definitely a balancing act between the state senate and the comptroller's office. But you know, Peter and I have a longstanding relationship. So I'm technically here also representing him this morning. In terms of my background, after I was in the House of Delegates, I moved over to the state senate, and I'm now serving on the Senate Budget and Taxation Committee, where I serve on the health subcommittee. So all of the health funding in the state of Maryland comes through my subcommittee. I'm the vice chair of the capital budget subcommittee. So all capital funding in the state of Maryland comes through my subcommittee. And it's a great partnership with the comptroller, because the comptroller serves on the Board of Public Works with the governor and the treasurer of the state of Maryland. So everything that we're doing on the state end when it comes to capital money, the comptroller eventually has his fingerprints on all the capital investments in the state, because he's part of the body that approves the funding. But really, where the rubber hits the road is not just the capital funding, but it's the investment in what you see on the local level, what Councilmember Evan Glass has been doing, and the other nonprofits in terms of investing in our community. And the comptroller and the Maryland General Assembly approved more than $1.8 million worth of additional grants for the nonprofits, and I think that'll go a long way. But it's also about being involved on the grassroots level, and I'm proud of the work that I did with Project Change in Olney. I was on their board before they even had a board listed, but they do great work. And also with Manna Food, I was on the board for Manna Food, and I know that the comptroller's been involved with many nonprofits through his more than 30 years of public service. But it really is a team effort when it comes to your elected officials and community members working together to make a difference. So really, I came here on behalf of the comptroller to salute you all, encourage you on, keep doing what you're doing. You all are making a difference in a time where politics is not necessarily well received. Everything that you're doing on the ground level is making a difference, and we need you all. I say that you don't have to be an elected official to be a public servant, and you all are a proof of that, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here this morning.
Thank you. Councilmember CRC.
Great. Good morning, everyone. I'm excited to have the opportunity to speak to you all. I actually want to start a little bit about talking a little bit about my background, because some of the things that the projects that you all are working on, when I was growing up, I actually took advantage of as a kid. So I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia. Hey! My father was incarcerated, so single mother, 3 kids, working mom, and we didn't have a lot of money, and so we relied a lot on different nonprofit groups to either help us with like Christmas gifts, because we didn't have anything, or big brothers, big sisters, to help me have a mentor, so that I could see positive influences and see people actually going to college and being successful, because that wasn't something that was immediately visible to me in my community. So from a very personal place, I want to say thank you for all that you do, because you really do impact lives in a way that you probably won't see tomorrow, but years down the line, someone that might have participated in your after-school program may be sitting here today as a council person for the city of Takoma Park. Grew up in Georgia, participated in lots of programs, and then went to Georgia State and studied economics, and then went on to Syracuse University I was working on a PhD in economics. And yeah. And I had this epiphany. I was in class one day, and we were talking about policies around SNAP. And why was it that people were not using all of their food stamp benefits, right? And we were doing this statistical model. It was real complex. And the professor was like, so we're seeing that people are just not spending the money. And I said, but you're not controller for transportation. Do you know how hard it is to carry $400 worth of groceries on the bus? I know it's not possible. So, you were surrounded by people who were thinking about policies and actually were informing policy, but didn't fully understand on the ground how people live, And so at that point, I was like, people are not a derivative. I need to go work for like public sector in some way. So I got my master's degree and then went on and got a master's in public administration from Syracuse as well, because I really wanted to work for government. Because I said, no, I understand enough about the math but I really want to be on the ground. And so at that point, I took a position at the Department of Health and Human Services. And so now I work for the Office of the National Coordinator, my day job. I think a lot of us have 2 jobs. My day job, I work at the Office of the National Coordinator for Health IT. I am the branch chief for data analysis. And what we try to do is to empower individuals, patients, to leverage their health information to improve their care. And it's important because there are a lot of disparities in terms of access to care, but not only access to care, but access to the technology that you can use to improve your care. So things like broadband access and things like that, there are huge disparities. And so what we're trying to do is bridge that digital gap. And so in the evenings, I moved to Takoma Park, and I was just trying to help, because I still had that passion to help. And so one of my neighbors was like, well, Talisha, why don't you attend a meeting or 2 and just maybe take some notes for a newsletter? I was like, okay, I can do that. That's easy. So did that, and then she said, well, Talisha, have you ever thought about being the president of the neighborhood association? You know, I was like, a couple block parties? I could do that. And then the council member that was over the ward was like, I'm thinking of retiring. Talisha, could you maybe run for council? And I was like, oh, so what's involved? Is it just like bigger block parties? Because I mean, if it's bigger block parties, I can do that. And he was like, yeah, right. And so ran primarily because I wanted to make sure that the ward that I represent in the city of Takoma Park is Ward 6 has a number of residents of color. There's also lots of development that's down the pike. And one of the big concerns that I had was, you know, are we going to end up in a situation where the vibrancy of our international community was going to be lost because of development? So that caused me to run for council. And so the city of Takoma Park does a lot to try to have a livable community for all. And we do it in ways with our budget, but we also do it in terms of community engagement. So I'm happy to be here today to talk a little bit about what we do at the city of Takoma Park, but also to answer any questions you may have about my experience in some of the programs that you all may be running today. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. And last but not least, Ms. Preston.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Elise Preston, and I'm the Associate Director with Maryland Out of School Time Network. I grew up in Baltimore County, graduate of Towson High School. I'm also a graduate of American University, so I was excited to hear that at the other end of the table. AU Eagles up here. And I am really passionate about youth development and about community development. I grew up having access to a lot of after school and summer opportunities, and I'm the oldest of 4 siblings, and something that really encouraged me to want to be connected to this kind of work in Baltimore and also in communities around the state is actually having extended family that live in Western Maryland and seeing some of the disparities that existed between the opportunities that I was able to access and some of my cousins were able to access in a more rural community, and seeing that for all of us who are around similar age, we have a lot of the same desires and interests, and specifically because of environment and resources and access, it can dramatically alter or change your entire life trajectory, depending on the schools that you're able to attend, the mentors that you're able to have, the experiences, the field trips. And so for me, even as a younger person who didn't necessarily have the language to fully understand what was happening, I was seeing these things and picking up on them and reading into the connections that were so meaningful for me, but don't exist for everyone. And so when I was an undergrad at American, I had a very difficult time deciding on my major. I kind of fluctuated back and forth. I was like, all right, I'm going to be poli-sci. I'm going to be a law and society major. No, sociology is my thing. Sociology, here we go. And I ended up having a meeting with my academic advisor that was like, okay, listen, you have an opportunity to create an interdisciplinary major. Would you like to do that? And I was like, that sounds great. I'm going to go for that. So I ended up studying communications and social advocacy, and having a focus specifically around community development and capacity building. And once I graduated from American, I decided that I wanted to come back to Baltimore and work. And so before my position at Most, I was working with a nonprofit organization in the city called Strong City Baltimore as the program manager of their 29th Street Community Center. And in that role, we worked in collaboration with a city school. So our community center was attached to an elementary middle school. And we also partnered with the neighborhood associations that surrounded the center to pull together resources and programming for youth and adults 6 days a week. And ran programming out of that space. And so that was a really amazing learning opportunity and experience to be able to be really immersed in community and working with youth and families, and also a nonprofit organization to think about ways that we could be really responsive to community needs and have expanded learning opportunities outside of the regular school day. And something that I saw as a challenge among our staff that worked at the community center, but also with the nonprofit staff that worked more administratively and other aspects and components of the organization, was just this element of burnout, like having so many kind of pertinent immediate needs that we want to address, but having some struggle around figuring out how to also take care of ourselves in the process, and being able to have a more healthy relationship with work and life. And so my first experience with burnout was in that role, and it really inspired me to explore different ways to have more of a healthy relationship with being active in a community role, and also being active in terms of like caring for myself moment by moment. And I, after about 3 years, transitioned from the role at the 29th Street Community Center to working at Most Network. And it's given me some perspective, a different perspective in the youth development world, because it is very different working in direct service versus working more at a capacity building level. So our work is really centered around professional development and advocacy for the youth development field. So exploring ways that we can organize really robust training, technical assistance, supports, professional learning communities for youth development professionals. And then also being able to be involved actively in policy and advocacy work, trying to get more public funding and public dollars for after school and summer opportunities. And so collaboration is a really important piece of both professional development and advocacy, seeing how you can partner with others to be able to tap into some of the wealth of resources that exist across the state, and being able to be kind of a hub of resources as a statewide network in terms of figuring out where we can take resources and programming that are excelling and doing really well and sharing best practices, or having trainers or facilitators being able to collaborate in different parts of the state. An example of a program that we're working through right now is a professional learning community that's specifically centered around inclusion. So how do we make sure that our youth development frontline staff have all of the training and resources that they need to be able to create programs that are inclusive for youth of all abilities? So we're kind of learning constantly over time, making sure that we are able to be a great resource for programs around the state, and making sure that we are also being really open and receptive to learning from others and growing together with others, because we don't necessarily have all of the answers, but it's really important to be able to have an emphasis on growth and development, and exploring how we can communicate more effectively and be a source of information that will be relevant and accessible and transferable for programs around the state.
Great, thank you. Well, it was really great and also inspiring to hear about all of your journeys and how you came to be sitting at this table today, and how in many cases nonprofits played a central role in that. So thank you so much for sharing. It's always great to hear how people got to where they are. So we're going to move into the Q&A portion of the program, and I'm going to give Ken the first question.
Anyway, thanks for the backgrounds. As was mentioned, it's clear that you all had a different journey. I've often been asked that question, how do you get from point A to point B? And everybody has a different path that they get to that point. This is going to sound like kind of a lowball question, but government has its role. Most of you represent government. Business has a role. Nonprofit world says they have a role. Faith has a role. So how do these entities best work together for positive change? Particularly, what's blocking us from this reality, this preferred future that we all dream of having, an equitable world? What's blocking us? What's in the way? And I'll let any of you start first, whoever's the brave one.
Okay. So Ken, that's a really good question. And you know, from the county perspective, I will say that we don't have to debate that so much here in Montgomery County, where Senator Zucker and I are two of, I think, probably approximately 50 elected officials in Montgomery County, all of whom are Democrats, right? So that's the political baseline to that answer. We all understand the important role of providing for our citizens. Housing, after-school programs, transportation, food insecurity, schools. And so that is not the focus of the debate. The focus of the debate is finding the funding for all those. And as I said in my opening statement, we just approved, first vote, final approval is next week, but a $5.8 billion budget, which is larger than that of a handful of states across the country. And a large portion of that, half of it, goes to our schools here in the county. And then we do provide a lot of funding for our nonprofit sector. And I didn't say this in my introduction, but for 4 years, I was the executive director of a nonprofit organization called Gandhi Brigade Youth Media that provided positive youth development programs for at middle school and high school students here in Montgomery County, providing digital media training so that their voices could be heard through multimedia outlets. And in the county, we do provide various funds through the rec department, through Health and Human Services, mostly those two departments. And we have generally a really good nonprofit sector. And I say that having been an executive in one and now being in government, seeing it from my perspective. And we are blessed here in Montgomery County to have nonprofits that all work together. The heart of your question really is how we continue doing our mission. And there's always room for more collaboration. And mostly that comes down to funding. As you all know, when a grant opportunity arises, you all or other members of your team or board members are furiously writing those grants, crossing your fingers, hoping you get it. Sometimes you're successful, sometimes you're not. Sometimes there might be government grants that you receive or that you don't. And sometimes it's another nonprofit whom you might be friendly with, whom you might not be friendly with. You know, frenemies maybe. But here in Montgomery County, we do have a lot of genuine and sincere partnerships. And it is because we have, as you met through Leslie, and I don't know where, oh, Leslie's over there. You know, we have associations for nonprofits here across the sectors. And so conveners who try and bring us together, ultimately it is all about the money and the mission. And from my perspective, I'll wrap up by saying there's always room to work together. And the need for that will probably get even more intense as the $5.8 billion budget here in Montgomery County does not continue to grow at the rate it once was. And the fight for the dollars is real, and the more that you are all able to collaborate, share your missions, share some funding, share a shared purpose, which I know we all do, I think the better we will all be.
Thank you.
I guess let me offer, I guess, a state perspective as well. I know one of the things that the comptroller said many times in many places, and I've said it as well, is just our reliance on the federal government in terms of federal grants. And with changing times in the federal government, we may have less reliability on that end. Obviously, that would require nonprofits to go to your state and county governments. But I'd also like, say, for instance, the Only Theater, they have a nonprofit board, and I know what they try to do is leverage the private sector for funding. I do think what a Councilmember Glass was saying is absolutely correct in terms of trying to work together where you can with other nonprofits, but also look to the private sector and businesses to see where they can be helpful, because with federal money with federal opportunities diminishing, you're going to want to look at the state government, you're going to want to look at county government, you're also going to want to diversify with looking at the private sector. And when it comes to roadblocks, I really feel like it is about the mission. I mean, I feel like generally everybody wants to help people, and your neighbors want to help their neighbors, especially those that they know. So it's a matter of making sure that you're connecting with the businesses in your area, a little bit outside your area, and trying to leverage the private money, because I think that'll help create stability in the future as well.
Good.
I just want to build on what Councilmember Glass was saying. You know, we're very blessed here in Montgomery County. And we also have a great organization that I need to mention, which is the Montgomery County Collaboration Council, who does a lot of great work about connecting nonprofit organizations with government. And sometimes I believe that one of the roadblocks or barriers is perceived barriers. And it's a mindset that this sort of coming from a scarcity mindset. We need to educate as we come up and learn the work of public service, that we can actually do more in collaboration. And once you have one good, successful collaboration, it builds that motivation to continue, and you see that it works. And that's something that's learned, and it's learned through practice, and it's learned through experience. And that I think about being a kid, and I remember being in college, and you're trying to order pizza, and you don't have enough money, right? So you look around to your friends, and everybody starts to empty their pockets, and you throw your money out on the table. I got $2, I got $4, and where maybe one person could have gotten a small on their own, but now we together, we not only get the pizza, but we get the special, we get the buy one, get one free, right? and when you think about collaboration, it's kind of like that. You know, we start throwing out resources, you know, it might be, I can't add any more FTEs, you know, the government's limited, but through our work with Adventists, we can hire educators. And you could start to throw your money on the table, so to speak, and see how you work together. So I think that it's getting over some of the perceived barriers, because it is scary when everybody is trying to survive, but we're fighting for the same mission. And I think trying to get a deeper understanding of what each organization is trying to do, because we're both fighting over the apple, but deep down we understand that, hey, you need the core, right? And I really like the apple skin, and we could both have the apple. And I think that we need to change our mindset and learn how to collaborate. And I think that that's the education of that is a big component.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Oh, here we go. I was trying to figure out how to grapple with this question, because it's a really big question. And just to kind of follow up on what Ms. Clutter shared, I think it really is a practice. And it's something that we are not, as a culture, very practiced at in terms of being able to collaborate with each other in a skillful way, because it's so challenging. I think I have seen it be done well, and it's always so satisfying and so exciting when you have someone in the room who's a really great facilitator and a leader who knows how to bring people to the table who have different ideas or different priorities, and have a conversation in a way where everyone feels like their voice is being heard and their concerns are being validated, and there is a process through which people are moving together slowly to come towards some kind of collaborative end product. But I think what often happens in that process is we get stuck or we get tripped up, or there can be misunderstandings, because when you're working in a cross-sector fashion, a lot of times we're not even speaking the same language. Like, we're coming at things from very, very different perspectives, so it's hard to move forward on things. And so I think one piece of this is the practice, exploring how to work collaboratively with people, how to create systems and processes so that you can actually move forward in a way where you're working together, and people have a sense of shared responsibility, and there's trust that's built. And I think it looks different in each different collaborative opportunity. It's going to be shaped by the people that are in the room or at the table. So building up those, I think it does take some education, like building up those tools and those resources to explore how to be able to work collaboratively in a skillful way. But it's really hard. But I think it's really possible too. There are a lot of people who are out here doing the work, but then it's like, how do we transfer that? How do we scale that? In Maryland specifically.
Good. Thank you. Go ahead.
Just to piggyback off of some points that were raised, I agree. It's important for there to be a shared mission, but I also think it's important for us to also think about our respective weaknesses. There are some things that maybe the private sector can just do quicker, easier, and faster than a nonprofit. Vice versa, there may be some things that are completely appropriate for government to do. And I think sometimes collaboration can be challenging when there might be a shared mission, but not a clear understanding of not just your role, but where are your strengths, right? And so that's something that's often challenging to do, because in many cases, you work in a somewhat siloed environment, right? So it not only requires you to not just focus on the network that you have at the ready when you're working every day and branch out, but it also requires you to be vulnerable enough to say, you know what? You might be able to do this and accomplish this task better than I could. And it might be saying, you know what, I'm gonna focus on the things that my group does really well. And we know that there's a need for another service, but we're not the right provider. So collaboration could be saying, you can do this better, let me work with you to give you those people who need that service. It may not be me taking it on. And that's sometimes hard, because you want to grow and you want to be responsive and you want to do what you know people in the community and the people that you touch really need. But sometimes it may mean being willing to share with others in the either nonprofit world, or directing people to the city, or directing people or identifying those areas where the private sector would be appropriate to jump in is also going to be critical.
Good. I mean, listening and from my own experience, partnerships can be really messy at times, and they can take a lot of work up front as you hammer out your procedures and your philosophies and your mission. But when you get through that, you can make some really positive. 1 + 1 = a little more than 2, and that's what you have to. That's what you have to go for. Leslie, you have another question.
I have a lot of questions. Okay, next question. How can those in the nonprofit field best communicate with elected officials and affect change at the government level?
All the lights.
Anyone?
I guess
Just dive in.
I guess I could start. So first of all, the first key is definitely make sure you communicate. One of the things that it was interesting. So I guess a couple of years ago, after this last election cycle, I was out to breakfast with some friends, and one of the people said to me, they said, Craig, what do I do with my elected officials? Because I agree with them. Like, I agree with, Council Member Glass. Like, he's doing everything I want. How do I communicate with them? I said, well, that's what I said. I said, well, that's right. Did you thank Council Member Glass? Because often we hear from Comptroller and myself and others hear from people who are upset. very rarely do we hear from people who are like, hey, you're doing a great job. And why is that helpful? One is the public servants, elected officials who really care about the community are listening to those people that not only disagree, but they're also listening to those people that are thanking them, because that's what's meaningful. We hear often when people aren't happy. We don't hear too often when we hear that when people are happy. And also, if we're having a debate in the county council or on the floor of the state senate, or if the comptroller's talking with the governor or treasurer, it's helpful to say, hey, we heard from 500 people that were happy with what we did. Not unhappy, but happy with what we did. I feel like, especially on the state level, and I'm sure it's the same on the county level, is we're much more approachable than the federal government. You can actually call us. The comptroller lives in Takoma Park. You can walk to his home. But it's about accessibility. It's about making sure you call or email, and you could also show up. I mean, the council members in Rockville, we're in Annapolis. We are accessible, and obviously, the city of Takoma Park, we're right here. But it's about just taking that step to reaching out, and the biggest thing is making it personal. Let us know why it's important from a personal end, not like a form letter, but just it could be 2 or 3 sentences saying, you know, Senator, Comptroller, Council Member, this is why it's important to me. I have, you know, someone who I love who is being served by this nonprofit. We need help. And that makes a difference. When you get to know your senators and delegates and council members, when you get in front of him or her, that makes a difference. So for you, it's a matter of just making sure that you reach out, not only to when we're not doing something you like, but especially when we're doing something you like.
Yes.
So I want to piggyback off of that point. There's this misnomer that government is endless and has multiple, like thousands of people working on every single issue that is facing America. And the fact of the matter is, there are a lot of people working on issues, but there's not enough money even for government to have the level of staff and the level of resources needed to explore and know everything that matters, right? Or to understand different policy issues or how they may impact the people that you serve in your nonprofits and the like. So I just want to echo the importance of speaking up, letting your elected officials know, understanding the issue and being able to communicate, like, this is why this policy is potentially problematic. Here are some suggestions, and make it active. Like, don't just say, hey, I don't like it. Offer a suggestion like, hey, we know this is an area that's really important, and we recognize some of the challenges that you're hearing, but here's how, if you were to increase this budget line by 2%, you could just really change the face of the game. Providing that level of thank you, but also some constructive paths forward makes my life a lot easier. Because as you've heard, many of us have 2 jobs, a day job and our elected positions. And so whatever you could do when you're advocating for your groups to make it a little easier for people to advocate for you as well, the better.
So what's being asked is how you can weigh in, I think, on 2 different aspects. One is budgetary, fiscal, which has been talked about, and then also policy that might affect you. And it is all about communication. And so not only communicating with the council members or elected officials as a whole, from your perspective, the staff perspective, have your board get engaged, have some of your other super volunteers get engaged, particularly around the budget. My inbox has received a lot of correspondence over the last month or so with individual nonprofit leaders, and then some have had their boards. Some of their, for youth organizations, actually some youth have come by or have sent some communication to us talking about the need and the importance of their programming. And so as we deliberate the budget, the amount of correspondence from certain organizations clearly sticks in my mind, and I'm cognizant of that as I go through some of those line items, seeing what those funding options are. And invite us to your events so we see firsthand. That is the best way for you to demonstrate your need. I'll be mindful. I'll ask you to be mindful and judicious in the amount of invitations you might send. The more you send, the more it's harder for us to go to everything, I'll put it that way. So invite us to a few really impactful events to let us know that that's the one to go to, and then give it your all so that we see firsthand how important your program is. And then policy. You know, while we're talking about budget, and that is, non-for-profit business, that's how we are able to fulfill our mission, but there are a lot of different policies that might not directly affect you, or you might not think it directly affects you, but I'll share one with you that I am proud of in my first 5 months on the council, and it is budgetary related, but it doesn't go to any of your bottom lines. Actually, it might. What my biggest initiative in this budget was to expand our youth access programs to bus services. And in Montgomery County, we used to have Kids Ride Free. We still do have Kids Ride Free. That would allow kids to ride from 2 to 8 p.m. for free during school days. And I've heard that lots of students had problems with those limited hours. And my husband and I had one car for 10 years. I had to get a second car to run for office, so I'm a user of our public transportation system. And in this budget, I, with the support of all my colleagues, was able to expand it so that starting in a few weeks or a month or so, kids will have access to ride-on and Metro bus services anytime a bus runs. And so for all of you, who have your programming outside 2 to 8, on weekends, on mornings, on holidays, know that kids here in Montgomery County are going to be able to access your programs taking ride-on or Metrobus, assuming they can get to your locations using those routes, which is a second conversation that I'm about to have with the county. But all of this is policy related. So I ask you to be mindful of some of those larger items that might not affect you directly, but affect all the students and youth and adults and your staff as well. And so the communication in all these regards would be helpful. And last personal pitch, I have an op-ed in the Washington Post that came out yesterday about this expansion program. Take a look at it, share it with your staff or with others, and let them know that this is coming. So.
Great, thank you.
Leslie, can I?
Sure, go ahead.
I just have 15 seconds. I have a question. So for the folks that are here from nonprofits, how many of you have capital needs, like bricks and mortar construction needs? Can I see a show of hands? Okay. Out of those folks that raised their hand, how many of you have reached out to your senator and delegate about your capital needs? Okay. All right. How many who haven't reached out to their Senate and delegate will do so tomorrow?
Thanks. Any other comments on this? Go
Yeah,
ahead.
just one comment on that. In recreation, so we're coming from a little bit of a different perspective here. We need folks to reach out and to be advocates and to, to let the elected officials know what programs are working and what's going well. And we were just funded for 4 Excel Beyond the Bell programs, which is an amazing collaboration between public schools and Collaboration Council, Recreation Department, and a whole host of nonprofits who are delivering amazing services. I just was at a finale the other day where a Passion for Learning, they had their culminating robots, and the kids were so excited to operate them and share. We have these 4 new programs going in, and we cannot run that operation without partnerships, without the nonprofits. And when the programs are going well, and we sort of serve as a vehicle for so many folks to deliver direct services to young people, we need to share our collective impact. And I can tell you right now, as a recreation department, we're not doing a great job telling our story. And not only that, I'm not sure they want to hear from me that when I go and say, oh, we're really doing a good job. No, I think they do, but they want to hear from other folks as well, to hear from the families and hear from the nonprofit organizations about how well it is really going. So please, we need more advocacy and we need to really tell that story together.
Thanks. Great. Okay. Are we good? Should we move on? Yeah. Okay, great. Well, I'm glad Evan took us to the place of policy because the next question has to do with policy. And it's about equity. And so here's the question. In our conversation and learning about racial equity, the focus is on the need to look at the laws and the policies and practices that historically and also currently disadvantage minority residents. As elected leaders and leaders working in government, how do you plan to undertake the internal work of looking at the policies and practices? Where will you start, and how will you incorporate the views of the residents most affected?
Okay, so I'll start this one. So Montgomery County last year, the council and county executive passed a law saying that we would look at everything through a racial equity lens. And that is a good foundation. Later this year, that will be codified further in some laws as to how we actually measure that. But in the first few months of serving on the council, I spent about 3, almost 4 days in workshops and trainings talking about racial equity here in Montgomery County. Some of that work moving forward is going to be led by Leadership Montgomery. It might be something you all are interested in doing with your boards. Some of the larger institutions and nonprofits in Montgomery County have undergone that training. I'd encourage you to look into it at Leadership Montgomery. But we're figuring it out. And the budget that we just passed is a good indicator that we get it through the expansion of the Excel Beyond the Bell programs, helping middle school students who need more help, looking at the public transit system, as I already shared with you, recognizing that the students who live in lower income communities in Montgomery County are twice as likely to have a carless household, thus more reliant on public transportation, and with not as much disposable income to spend on it. So that is absolutely an access and equity issue. Our school system, recognizing that while the Montgomery County Public Schools receives about half of the overall budget, the needs are vastly different throughout Montgomery County. And I know all of you get it if you're in this room today. And so the 9 members of the council and our county executive are fully aware of this, and there will be some legislation moving forward to further codify it. But it is something that, also going back to the budgetary aspect, we're mindful of. And organizations throughout the county who have vastly different constituencies and individuals who have differing needs, we're mindful of that. And so when we invest in our nonprofits, we do take that into consideration. So again, it's sharing your stories, your metrics, but moving forward, stay tuned for what some of the policy changes will be. We will be having a robust conversation here in Montgomery County, and change is hard. And we are not the county that we have been or were 50 years ago, 40 years ago, 20 years ago. We are a majority county of residents of color. We have about a third of our residents who are renters, and the demographics continue shifting. And for those who are not aware of those shifting demographics, and trust me, there are a lot of people who do not know the realities of our new Montgomery County, where 1/3 of our residents were not born in the United States, do not speak any of the 130 languages spoken within MCPS aside from English, and don't know how many of our communities live. So your engagement in this conversation, when it becomes more public, will be crucial, because it's about changing hearts and minds and letting people know about the needs that we have today and the needs that we're going to face. So I appreciate the question. I can't give you any more specifics at this point in time, but do stay tuned. Feel free to follow up with me, of course, but we will need your help to educating everybody in Montgomery County about the Montgomery County of 2019.
Thank you. Let's see, anyone? Go ahead.
Sure. So I think, not only do we have to look at the Montgomery County perspective, but we also have to take a statewide approach as well. And I've often said, and I know the comptroller's often said, that it's not only about closing the achievement gap, it's also about closing the opportunity gap. In the state of Maryland, we passed a $46.8 billion budget, and the priority there was making sure that we're focused on education. So this past year, we brought back $1 billion for Montgomery County. Not talking about other jurisdictions, I'm talking about Montgomery County, and that was $52 million more than last year. We passed what's called the Kirwan Commission legislation blueprint for Maryland's future, and where we'll be putting an additional $255 million statewide for education funding, operating funding, K through 12 education. And why is that important? The reason why that is important is when we're talking about closing the achievement gap, we need to make sure that we're hiring good teachers, and all teachers are good, but making sure that we're hiring more teachers, making sure we're paying them well, and also making sure that we're putting in grants to impoverished areas, including those underserved areas in Montgomery County. We're investing more than $75 million extra in the disparity grants. And it's also one of the things that the comptroller has been very active on is making sure that, especially in Baltimore City and Baltimore County, it's amazing that even in today's world, kids are still without proper heat and AC. So I know that the comptroller has been very visible and vocal about making sure that the kids, students in underserved areas are getting the proper funding. This past legislative session as well, it's about making sure that, when you talk about racial equity, you also want to make sure you have equity in healthcare. And people that need healthcare still aren't necessarily getting what they deserve and what they and their family desperately need. So this past session, the legislature passed, and the comptroller will be enforcing tax checkoff. So when people file their income taxes, they'll be checking a box, checking on whether or not they have health insurance. And if they don't check it, Councilmember Glass, then we're going to put them on the rolls to make sure they get health care. So it's the small stuff that we can do, and actually it adds up a lot well in the state end, but it's a matter of us taking a state perspective and making sure that Montgomery County, especially Montgomery County, gets its fair share, because this image that some have of Montgomery County is we're a great county, but we still have our own challenges. When you think about the students in Montgomery County who are receiving free and reduced meals, is more than the entire DC public school entire DC public school system. So if you take every student in DC public schools, that is less than the amount of students in Montgomery County that are receiving free and reduced meals.
Thank you.
Race equity is critically important in the city of Takoma Park. Back in 2017, the council passed a resolution to ensure that when we were making decisions, that they were all being done through using a racial equity lens. I want to echo the sentiment of Councilmember Glass in that it is hard. It is really, really hard. Not only because it means thinking as decision makers about things differently, but also communicating and trying to encourage others in the community to think about things differently. Things as simple as your process for sidewalk requests that are petition-based. When you have residents of color or residents from other countries that are, historically or culturally don't have a level of trust with the government enough to walk around, get a petition, and then talk to the man about getting a new sidewalk. These kinds of things create disparities in communities. Something as little as a sidewalk or asking for trees can make residential disparities very apparent. And so the city of Takoma Park has been committed. We've been council members have attended a number of trainings through GARE. We even invited facilitators during our last priority setting sessions to come in and kind of talk to us about equity as we're making decisions about our priorities as a city. And so it is critically important. Now we're at a place where we have to start thinking about things like when the rubber meets the road and actual implementation. Because it's real great to have resolutions and to say things at a really high level. It's a lot harder when you're actually trying to make some of those substantial changes in processes and make some substantial changes in approvals and where you allocate money. That's when things get kind of hard. So again, the city of Takoma Park is extremely committed and has been working with a number of different groups, National League of Cities and others, to really try to think through how to address racial equity and how to make decisions based on race equity through that race equity lens. But this is new. This whole goal is somewhat new, and so the policies and things are kind of, people are developing them as they go. And there are a lot of lessons learned. There are some things that work and some things that don't, and that's okay. But what's important is that there's a commitment to ensuring that there's equity in your community, and how can you make some changes in the way that we typically have done business to ensure that we're not perpetuating those disparities.
Thank you. Ms. Preston, as a nonprofit, how are you addressing racial equity?
Sure. So coming at this from a slightly different perspective, it is very exciting to see that more nonprofit organizations in the field are incorporating a racial equity lens into whether it's their mission statement or their board directive or some of these elements. And that also foundations and philanthropic organizations in some aspects are incorporating an element of accountability around race equity in terms of reporting for nonprofit organizations. And so I think this, just having this be a priority and a part of the conversation is huge, because this is an element that has always existed within our organizations and within our culture, but has gone unspoken. And so now that we have the opportunity to really bring it to the surface and unpack a lot of these aspects that create the institutional and systematic barriers, this really opens up a new set of expectations and accountability, and even just questioning and interrogation that we're doing around the work that we're doing in each of our organizations. And so where most is in the process is still very much in process. So in terms of coming up with a racial equity statement that will be incorporated into our mission and our vision, and also trying to make sure that that is an active component of the work that we're doing in our trainings, and trying to also fold that into our annual statewide conference, and making sure that we are being more intentional when it comes to all different aspects of the work. So whether that means putting together a hiring process, or thinking about who we are going to invite to be trainers or facilitators for the workshops that we're hosting. So I think that it is so essential to the work that we do being its most, or really operating in a way that is most valuable to people and most accessible to people, because we really do have the greatest impact and the greatest ideas when we're bringing in diverse voices, and thinking about unpacking the ways that maybe even just 6 months or a year ago we were operating in a way where we were potentially perpetuating institutionalized oppression and racism, because it's really challenging to avoid. It's like so steeped into our culture and everything that we do. So I think it's really important too to also have kind of an ability to have some grace and some understanding when things do come up, because now something that is kind of challenging around the current conversations that we're having is that it's important to hold organizations accountable, and to make sure that when harm is done, or there might be something that was done inappropriately or incorrectly, that we are calling it out. But then how do we call something out in a way that allows us to have a conversation and bring someone to the table in a restorative way, versus completely severing a relationship or saying that we will no longer recognize or be able to work with or partner with an organization ever again. So I think also trying to incorporate some more tools and strategies around how do we have these really challenging, difficult conversations where there's a level of accountability, but also folding in that restorative aspect so that we can allow people an opportunity to learn and grow and evolve as we're all learning and growing and evolving, and creating space for there to be those opportunities for learning and not just severing relationships. So I think it is still messy. It's very much in process, but it's exciting to see that the work is happening, I think, in nonprofit organizations around the state.
Thank you. Ms. Clutter, did you want to comment on that?
Yes. One of the things, it's always been part of our mission in recreation to make sure that high-quality recreation and leisure services are accessible for everyone. But we talk about when the rubber meets the road, and that's what we want, but we're just starting to scratch the surface. And I think one of the common themes here is really listening to our community to find out what our community needs. And it's really the difference between equity and equal, right? We used to make things equal all the time, but not everybody wears a size 10 Nikes. And finding out what different communities need. And for us, it's so important in our park and recreation industry and what we do, because we know that people go to work every day, and if they're not fortunate to be blessed to be sort of defined by the work they do, people are defined by what they do in their leisure time. And having access in communities that have access to those amenities are so critical to quality of life. And so for us, it's really it's to start to take a more strategic research-based lens, even how we place our, we would love to have Excel Beyond the Bell all across the county because so many of our schools are in need, but where do we place those resources? So coming up with we have a strategic program index where we start to look at all of the different quantitative factors, but it's the qualitative factors that are also important drivers in what our communities are saying and where those needs need to be placed. And for us, in terms of facilities and infrastructure moving forward, it is to develop equity matrix, so to speak, so we can overlay that lens in everything that we do. And we're not there. We're starting to scratch the surface, but we need to have more conversations as we move forward, because it is important to the quality of life of all of our residents here in the county and across Maryland as well.
Great. Thank you. Great. So now we want to hear from all of you. It's an opportunity to ask questions from the panel. And I'm going to turn this. Ken, are you going to facilitate this part, or do you want me to? Oh, he's going with the roving microphone. Here we go.
I'll do the mic thing.
Thank you.
There we go. First question. Second question. Third question.
Thank you. Well, so far, I think there is a partner that almost nobody mentioned a lot. I thank you, Ms. Adrian, that you mentioned it. My name is Vanessa Pinto. I work for a nonprofit, a community-based nonprofit, CHEER. And we work, we are very local, only the Long Branch area in Silver Spring, and Takoma Park. So I'm very concerned that this partner that I'm talking about is the community. I'm glad that recently some organizations are making these spaces available for community to participate on decision-making processes. For example, through advisory committees. So I'm so glad, and I think I have the luxury of working on the place that I live, which lets me be conscious about all the things that are happening with my neighbors, which are the ones that have those needs. And if you have them on the table helping you decide the programs, you would be really amazed with the results. And you're not only making them or hearing them, you're helping them in their leadership. Almost nobody is talking about the leadership. What about those? How many programs do we have that are helping in their leadership in the community. Because we don't want them to be only recipients of services their whole life. So that is something that I am working on that. And there are a few, no, I'm not gonna say that there's a few things that we are doing. We are doing many things, but we don't have enough money to do it. Most of the time I'm doing volunteer work because it's my passion. Because I know that I'm looking at the community now with a needs-based approach, with an asset-based approach, which is letting me be more aware of the greatness of the capacity that they have and the things that they can do, they can accomplish. So I would like you to think more on, if we are talking about allocation of funding, if you can think more about the leadership in the community and the programs that are helping on that big issue. Thank you.
That's a great point about how we need to not just consider people needing to be served, but develop people as leaders. Anybody want to comment on that?
Oh, sure. Thank you so much for that point. I think it's an excellent point, and it actually piggybacks off of the prior point around race equity. One of the things that the city of Takoma Park has started to think about is what are some ways in which to not only reach different communities, but also engage those communities. We tend to forget that it is a bit of a luxury to be able to participate in various committees and advisory groups and things of that nature, because you're taking time away from your family, the hours in which you may be able to do it, depending on the type of job that you have, might require you to have to miss some time at work. And so we are starting to think about other ways in which we can make it a little easier for a broader group of residents to be able to participate in some of these committees. And that's something that we've noted as a priority to really rethink our committee structure. We've toyed around with providing childcare at city council meetings so that parents can bring their children, working with our rec staff, can bring their children and still be able to participate in some of these meetings. We're thinking through, would a stipend kind of help some of those residents who would maybe have to take some time away from work in order to participate in a community work group or advisory group. So there's opportunity to kind of think of how we're doing things differently and recognizing some of the challenges that some members of our community would face in order to be more active. And I'm a firm believer that exposure is everything. So if we're thinking through ways to better enable residents of all walks of life to be able to actively participate in leadership roles in different community groups and the like, the more likely we're kind of building that ultimate self-sufficiency that you've mentioned. So I totally agree, and that's something that the city of Takoma Park is starting to just now think through.
Go ahead, Evan. Yeah.
And I'll add, Ms. Pinto, thank you for your work at Cheer. You and Bruce and the rest of the team do great. Have a great mission, and I know that you have a lot of collaboration, not only here in the city of Takoma Park, but also countywide with MANA and some other organizations. But I appreciate the point about not everyone being able to volunteer or do more given their life circumstances. But and I think that's a really important point. The other aspect that you mentioned was about not wanting to just give out services, and I think that is a really salient point, that most nonprofits that are in that type of mission do a lot of providing food, providing shelter, providing, and what we're trying to do is help all the people that we see, where we see needs exist. And as we look at the landscape, we recognize there are a lot of different pockets of need. And so while we, to use a metaphor, we are trying to help sick fish that we see, but if you take a deeper dive, it's the lake that is polluted. And the pollution in the lake, we see lots of lakes in our community between food insecurity, housing insecurity, positive youth development, lots of other issues we can go into. There are a lot of polluted lakes, which means it's the groundwater that we need to tap into and fix. That's where the policy comes in. That's the hard work of changing decades and centuries of injustices that have taken hold here in the United States, quite frankly. That's where the racial equity workshops and work come into play. And it's not going to change overnight, and we need to be thoughtful of it, but that's how we help transform some of the missions and some of the need in the community, and that is really hard work. But I know that locally, statewide, the policymakers are looking at it, and there are a lot of nonprofit conveners who are investing in that type of work as well. And so I appreciate you raising that, and just wanted to share those thoughts.
Great. Anybody else want to comment? Go ahead.
And I just wanted to share an example of where, over the course of this year, I've seen this play out in a coalition in Maryland, and that's with Baltimore Education Coalition. And so they actually received a lot of feedback and pushback in the last year, or I guess it was closer to 2 years ago, around there being a lack of diversity in terms of the leadership of the organization, and that they were not incorporating enough community voice in their organization. And they led and facilitated a retreat, and Baltimore Racial Justice Action led the retreat, and they did some deep work and some planning. And then during this legislative session, starting in January, they actually recruited and brought on board 4 students and 4 adults who all go to or are parents of students in Baltimore City Public Schools. And they served as some of the coalition builders during this legislative session to help organize the lobby nights that we held in Annapolis, and also to do some work in terms of educating parents in their schools around some of the policy related to Kerwin that was coming down the pipeline throughout the course of the session. And so I really love that you posed that question, because it is so important for us to kind of figure out within our organizations what are the ways that we really can realistically work to incorporate community voice and create the kinds of roles where people, it's not just kind of like a one-off. Sometimes I see this in groups. Maybe you have like a one-off community forum, or you have a focus group, or something that is still great. You're getting feedback, but how do you keep people engaged on an ongoing basis and allow people to really feel like they're part of the process, and also to be developing different leadership skills as you shared. And so that's one example of how I've seen it played out. And there were stipends also provided to each of the members of the coalition who were part of that process over those 3 or 4 months. And so I think it is a really important question to ask for each of us to be asking ourselves within our organization: how are we really actively engaging community members in a meaningful way?
Great. Thank you. Anybody else want to comment?
Second question, please identify yourself.
Good afternoon. My name is Michelle Webb. I am the founder of a nonprofit organization, the Webb Group Inc. Educational Learning Center. We are located in Baltimore City. I want to commend you all for the panel. I've been just enjoying myself and taking notes, because I will definitely be sharing it with our new city council president and our new mayor. We need help for nonprofits in Baltimore City. And I understand about the 3% increase for nonprofits. It's needed. I've been doing nonprofit for 10 years now. I love what I do. I love seeing the outcomes for the youths that come through our program. As a matter of fact, I attended one of Montgomery County's youth development program here a couple years ago and got certified. So I take that information back to my program and use it for our youth. This summer, we're not only going to be serving youth, but I develop an intergenerational computer training program for seniors. And we're going to have our youth work with the seniors and train them how to use computers. So I'm excited about that. I am a member of the Maryland Nonprofit Organization through the STEM Ambassador Program and also a STEM Observer. So yes, I love what I do, and this information has been so very helpful. Thank you.
Go ahead.
If I could say, the 3% basically cost of living increase that'll be reflected in our contracts, our grants with the nonprofits, did not come about just because my colleagues and I thought it was the right thing to do. It was, I'll give Lesli a lot of credit here. Through her organization, Nonprofit Montgomery, they convened meetings with every one of us where the nonprofit leaders from some of the county's largest and most prominent nonprofits came and took time out of their schedule to meet with all of us. And there were other politics at play within the county where we were dealing with contracts for other county employees, and we were dealing with increasing our school budget. And so they made a very compelling argument that you're giving everybody else raises, and here we haven't received one, and look at all the work that we do. And they won.
Thank you. Okay. Anybody else want to comment?
I'd just like to quickly comment and say your passion shows. Thank you for doing the work that you do, and that you're going down the right path with the intergenerational thing. If you need some help, we have a Tech Connect program that teaches technology to seniors. You contact Montgomery County Recreation if you need to share ideas or get some insights to how it's gone for us. My last name is Clutter. You can't mess that up. You can find me on the website. But I'd be happy to talk to you about it and help you out.
It's a good
Great, thanks.
campaign slogan.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, Ms. Webb, you have a fantastic delegation out in Baltimore City. Antonio Hayes, Senator Antonio Hayes, has been doing a great job, as well as Corey McRae, Mary Washington, and others, Bill Ferguson. And I say that not only because they're great people, but as I think you heard me say, I serve on the Budget and Taxation Committee, and they're doing some great work out there for the nonprofits in Baltimore City. Antonio Hayes testified on a bill, and we passed it, that will increase funding for students to be able to get jobs in careers, career training, and get positions and jobs after that. And then Antonio Hayes was in particular very passionate about a group called the Mage. And it was basically a way where you take young people in impoverished areas, dress them for success, and help them get jobs. And Senator Ferguson has been very impactful on opportunity zones, where he's increased funding for opportunity zones, which is basically taking state and federal money and building affordable housing in distressed areas. So your Baltimore City delegation, again, I'm a Montgomery County person, the comptrollers as well, but this really is a good example of how the state should follow in terms of investing in areas that need it and individuals that need it as well.
Thank you. Any other comments? No, good. Should we move on? Another question?
Okay, I had committed to somebody as number 3, but in an effort to not stumble, I forgot who it was. Was it you, Jack? Yes, no. You're next. You're next.
We have time
And then
for.
back there. Yeah. Last row.
Hello. Jack Morton, AmeriCorps Vista. Thank you all for being here today. It's been a real pleasure hearing all your views and sharing your information. I have a quick employment question, a little different topic here. But as you well know from Amazon and everything else, there's a lot of competition out there for the best talent and jobs in the area. How do we attract the best talent to Montgomery County and the greater Maryland? And secondly, you all, a few of you are maybe employers even for the public, for your government agencies. How do you attract the best talent to the public sector? Myself, for example, will be transitioning out of the Vista program, and we have choices. I could go work for Booz Allen or go work for XYZ. Why should we work for the public sector? And how, more importantly, in this time of in age, how do you make it easier for somebody to navigate that maze and join the public sector? Thank you.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'll start. So I can speak to that point from a couple of perspectives. One, in terms of my role in my day job, the federal government, one of the things that has been challenging is trying to bring in new talent. The federal hiring process is long. And it is also a bit difficult to get in when you're not already somehow bumped up the list. I can't stress enough how important the fact that you all come out of the Vista program with that non-competitive eligibility is. It is extremely, extremely, extremely important. It basically allows federal agencies to kind of bump you up, and so it means that you would be more likely, we would even receive your resume. The way the process works, if you're on a certain list, a hiring official wouldn't even see that you're there. And so it's quite antiquated, but it's a real possibility. I like to encourage people who serve in programs like the Vista program. I started working in federal government as a emerging leader intern as well. And you do, Booz Allen is gonna offer you a lot of money. I mean, let's just be honest. They're gonna offer you a lot of money. But it's also important for you to feel that passion and that desire to continue to serve, right? And so sometimes there's some trade-offs there. I will say, from a federal hiring perspective, there are a number of additional avenues that have been created now to make the process a little easier. There are a number of internship programs, which are really not really internship programs. Pathways internship program is a way for people who are currently enrolled in school to apply to work for the federal government. There are two types of pathways programs. There's the intern, which means you're still a student, and there's the recent graduate, which means that you just are about to graduate or you've just graduated. And that is a rapid fire way to get in. Also, again, leveraging that non-competitive eligibility, using that year wisely. So if you are interested in federal service, using that time that you have wisely is important. From a city's perspective, I think part of the challenge is just communication about positions that are available. We posted a number of positions, and we're really trying very hard to connect with the best and the brightest. So I think part of the challenge too is just making sure that it's clear that there are jobs available. How do we connect to groups like, and this is applicable to both the city as well as the federal government. How do we connect with you all so that when there's a job available, because I got 3, that we can post to make you aware that this is something that's out there and what we're looking for. And if you have a question or you just want to send your resume to someone, that it's not this big black box, that there are people who are actively looking for highly talented individuals to come in to really help us solve some of the issues that we've been talking about today. And I think part of the challenge is just connecting. Booz Allen has a lot of recruitment money, and they go around to all of the schools, and I'll talk to all the people, and they have you do these little exercise where you present, and then they pick people. When I was in grad school, that's what they did. They would go around and, they do all of that stuff because they have this huge budget just for recruitment. For a lot of federal and state and local agencies, the resources available for that level of recruitment just is not there. And so whatever we can do to try to think of ways to make it easier for you all to know when opportunities are available, the better.
Great. Other thoughts about how we can attract talent to the public and nonprofit sector?
Yeah, just a couple quick comments on that. It is that the hiring process, to be candid, is cumbersome, and sometimes you might need a doctor to get through it, it seems like, at times. But to Councilmember Cersei's point, there's disparities even between agencies when it comes to the level of HR support, and that's the reality of it reality for us today. And the marketing and the outreach component isn't there. And so if you're on the other end and you're trying to get in, relationships are key. And if any type of field experience work you can have that's going to be really relevant to the job that you're applying for is going to be critical. And that's going to help set you apart. Build relationships and don't be afraid to call and ask questions. And I know that might seem a little bit more daunting in terms of like on a federal level, which I really don't have experience there, but on a local level, our HR is working hard. Certainly, I'm sure they're feeling overwhelmed at times, but they will answer your call. They will get back to you. You can email them if for some reason you've gotten hung up in the process or you have questions. And you can also reach out to the individual agencies or departments that you're applying for and ask questions in advance of the application process. So do a little homework on the front end, and they might have some tips or ideas for you to try to navigate that process a little bit more smoothly. But we are all looking for, and I hear this in my industry in particularly across across the field, folks are desperately seeking talent, and so do a little homework on the front end.
Unlike the other elected officials, we on the Montgomery County Council it is our full-time job, and we have a full suite of staff that help us. And I say that so that you can reach out to me, and I have a dedicated team who will help you in various ways. And I say that because when I was hiring my staff back in December, right after I was inaugurated, I realized as I was helping shepherd them through the HR process, which Adrian just alluded to, and it's not any better for the Department of Recreation than it is for the County Council staff members. It's still an onerous process. And I learned from my chief of staff, who was coming from the Hill. She used to work on Capitol Hill, and she was coming to be my chief of staff. She told me that they had asked for her salary history throughout the process. And I said, well, why are they doing that? That doesn't make any sense, because some of you might know that we have a pay gap that exists in this country, in the state of Maryland, where for every $1 a man makes, a woman makes 77 cents. African American women make 69 cents for every $1 a man makes, and for Latinas, it's 47 cents. And every time we rely on pay history to set future pay, we perpetuate that gap. So I say all of that because yesterday was an exciting day for me. My first bill as a Montgomery County Council member was signed, and it's the Montgomery County Pay Equity Act, which means, thank you, which means starting in 90 days from today, because it was signed yesterday, Montgomery County will no longer ask for salary history in the hiring process. And I say that because hopefully that will be one more way that we can attract better people to work for Montgomery County. And I don't mean better as in we already don't have good people, but we have people who will not be discouraged in the process. Let me put it that way. And hopefully other governments will take that up, and maybe even the private sector as well.
I was just going to say, do you think we can get Maryland to do the same?
Yeah, so I guess speaking from the Comptroller's office, the Comptroller's office has 1,200 employees, and one of the goals of the Comptroller's office is to recruit and retain young people in order to create longevity in the agency. The state of Maryland, what the Senate had, is a little different. I do have actually my staff has a more full-time job than I do. The senators get a full-time staff, but it's, the delegates' offices are different. But I would encourage you all to reach out to the Department of Legislative Services or reach out to your delegates and senators. I mean, I think that the biggest key is just reaching out to your elected officials to find out what jobs may or may not be available. I think that really is the first step.
Good. I think we, did you want to add anything? No, you're good. Okay, I think we have time for probably just one more question.
For those of you looking for a job, there's 6 to 8 or 8 of them posted on the bulletin board out there.
There you go.
We have we need help. Apply, please.
My name's Denise Jones, and I do live here in Takoma Park. I've worked throughout Montgomery County in the education equity and access arena. I run a small business now doing community engagement work for children, youth, teens, and adults. And I kind of want to circle back to where you started, Vanessa, and also you as well, Councilmember Searcy. The leadership development conversation is something I've been having with a number of people for the last year, because we are now a minority county, and even long before that, I'm very interested in seeing what new pathways can be developed to bring more people of color so that we are into the pipeline, so that we are looking at more of asset-based strengths. And it's more than just the connections. Right now, Leadership Montgomery is not enough. It's just not. And there are so many people who are skillful, knowledgeable, and are interested to participate in our communities. And you can't have, I guess what I'm really saying is, we have to have a different way of thinking about who can contribute and what does that look like in our communities, and how are we really going to get behind supporting people's development, because it's not just one way, and it doesn't just look one way either, those strengths. So I guess really that's what I wanted to do, was just comment on that and ask you if there are any, have you ever given any thought to that? What can we do in each one of your sectors? What can you do? I will make a plug. I am very happy to hear what Ms. Preston was saying earlier about taking a look at who they invite even to deliver workshops for their annual conference. I am going to be a presenter at the annual conference in November.
Great. Would you like to comment? Since you
Sure.
got called out just there? In
So,
a good way.
sure. Yes. So the leadership conversation is so key and so important to all of our work. And I guess I'll make a plug for an organization in Baltimore that is doing some great work with young people starting in the middle school and high school years around intentional leadership development, and that's Greater Baltimore Urban League and their Saturday leadership program, which I had the opportunity to volunteer with back in November. And it was really amazing to see that even starting in middle school, students were asked to put together their own resume and elevator pitch and start working on thinking about how they're communicating about their goals and their vision for themselves as they're moving forward into high school and beyond. And so I think it's so in the ways that we're teaching students in school each day, I think there's definitely opportunities to incorporate more of that, but there's such an emphasis and a focus on just performing in terms of what that looks like for outcomes on a test or an exam, but really trying to think about ways that we can help students to develop a broader sense of their own self-efficacy and being able to see themselves as leaders and being able to draw upon their unique gifts and skills and interests. And that, I think, really takes a level of being able to pour into students on an individual level and on a larger group level. And after school and summer opportunities are a great space to do that, because I think in the in-school setting sometimes it is challenging to be able to have enough time and space for that. But in the organizations that many of our Vistas are working in, and also in our work that we're doing in community, there's, I think, a great amount of potential to be able to start having those conversations related to leadership. And I think another kind of piece of the field that's growing and expanding is this conversation around social emotional skills and social emotional learning. And in addition to having social emotional learning for youth, we also need to be having a greater emphasis on social emotional learning for adults as well, because that's often something that we weren't necessarily taught. And so being able to kind of like sharpen our skills in those areas is really important. And so I think when we set that up as being a priority and something that we want to invest time and resources and training around, that's really one of the key ways that we can start expanding that availability for more leadership opportunities for folks that may not have necessarily had access to those opportunities before. And then even once people are brought into organizations or coalitions, still keeping that emphasis on learning and developing and growing together as leaders, because it is an ongoing process. It doesn't really stay stagnant or the same. We have to have some kind of capacity for learning how to communicate with each other and continuing to grow the work.
Great. Thank you. All about developing the human capital.
Yeah.
Right. Anybody else want to comment on that?
I'll make a quick comment. It does start early, and with young people, in particular, getting into this line of work, it's training young people on getting engaged civically, and I think that can start early. But also, once folks get into the job, leadership development can't stop there, and the cultural competencies need to be in the job description. They need to be in the expectations. They need to be in the performance measures. And then we need to continue to develop those staff who are going to hire and train. When they have the opportunity to hire and train, they're going to be picking folks who are more culturally competent as well. So it's definitely a cycle. It starts early when you're young, but when you get into those positions, you got to continue to work and develop that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Craig, what are you going to say? Denise, I appreciate the question. Thank you. And my comment regarding Leadership Montgomery, it is a different cohort than the one that you're referring to. Absolutely. I understand that. And the Leadership Montgomery Racial Equity Workshop is for essentially existing leaders, board members, those in the know, if you could say it that way, but don't quite know the new Montgomery County and need to be educated on that. The emerging leaders, those the diamonds in the rough that we need to bring out. Organizations like Impact Silver Spring do some great community-based development, particularly in this part of the county as well. And I would love to follow up with you to see what we can do, not only to strengthen it here, yes, open hands on both our parts, but also for the rest of the county. So let's talk.
And I would say, just sort of wrapping up, I would say when you're trying to stress the new generation of leaders, I would encourage them to get into programs like AmeriCorps. Right? I mean, isn't that
There you go. Nicely
isn't
done.
that sort of the next generation? And part of the reason why we're here today is in terms of that volunteerism. And when you look at the agency of the Comptroller's office, as a matter of fact, the Comptroller prides himself on trying to attract the top talent in the state, and the communications director actually went through AmeriCorps for the Comptroller's office. So it's a great program, and glad we could be participating today.
Okay, promise this is just a comment.
Okay.
It is just a comment. Council Member Searcy, you spoke earlier in your introduction about how important and impactful on your life and others are those who volunteer to work with youth. And I want to tell you that I do the work I do today in part because of my aunt who ran Vista for 4 presidents.
That was a good plug. Okay, since we talked about employment, there's one Vista volunteer that has one last question.
Hi, I'm B from Detroit via Atlanta. How you doing? I'm an AmeriCorps Vista member with the Most Network in Baltimore. Andy's the big guy. He's the good guy. And I'm also a Vista ambassador outside of Most Network under CNCS. My question is, with all of the positive influences I'm finally seeing with women running for office and getting in office as congresswomen and senators, there's always a lot of intimidation when you hear people say, run, we need more people to run, especially minorities. And I'm like, I'm going this way. What advice do you have for us to even get out there and consider running? Because I've been thinking about it, but I'm like, I don't know.
Great question.
Stop thinking about yourself and how you feel and think about what you can do for others.
Oh.
Great.
If I were thinking about when I decided to run myself, like I didn't have the time. I'm naturally an introvert. You wouldn't know this, but I am. Like, I am exhausted. I go to a festival, I need to lay up for like 2 days after a festival. But I, for me, it was more about making sure that my neighbors, my friends, my community was being properly served, and the value that I knew that I could bring to the table. Am I perfect? No. Is anyone up here perfect? No. But you have to be willing to take that risk, take that chance on yourself and believe in yourself and what you could do, but also recognize the value you bring to the community. And so usually when you think about it that way, the stuff that you're like, oh my God, I don't want to be bothered with, it fades away. And the goal of really trying to help your community, it weighs so much more.
Great answer.
Great. I hope we found this morning informative. I want to thank the staff and the volunteers behind the scenes that got out the tables and the chairs and, making sure the mic is working. Those of you on the panel, thank you ever so much for taking time from your busy schedules, as you reminded us, and sharing your insights and thoughts and wisdom that we can use. So let's give them a big round of hands, everybody. And I'm sure that we'll keep thinking of new questions, right? So maybe we need to do this again, maybe not in Takoma Park, but somewhere else, and have this dialogue. It's important. A number of things. Evan, stay tuned. You kept reminding us there's more to come. That got into my radar, okay? So thanks ever so much. So if you have any questions and concerns, you can email me. Just use info@acsgw. I'll pass them along or do whatever we can with them. Change takes time. Takes a lot of time sometimes. And on the other hand, it can happen in a snap. And we hope that we can make this change happen. It takes a lot of effort. It takes some dollars. It takes some tears and a little frustration. Hopefully no heartburn. Your presence here said that you're really interested in building stronger, more vibrant communities. And take some time. Dialogue with each other. It's all about networking. Networking is essential to learning and to building friendships and to building connections. Sometimes you aren't sure what you're going to do with that new connection you just made, but you tuck it away, and someday you're going to go, wait a minute, I got to find that business card. And you dig through that big, tall stack, right? Looking for that key contact that you made. So we thank you so much, and we wish you well, and spend some time visiting, and there might be some instruction for the Vista people. Maybe you already have your instructions I'll leave that to the Vista people to take care of. So thank you again ever so much.